Well, depending on where you're coming from, either good morning or good afternoon, thank you so much for joining us for this latest iteration in our NCEA webinar series. Thanks for coming on time. We'll get started right at the hour. Get comfy. There's a chat box where you can pose questions, comments, to us as your presenters, introduce yourself, where you're coming from. Jill, how are you doing today?
Doing well. It's a strange July. So we've had lots of, I was on a call earlier with 86 teachers, and it was just because they wanted to know about something. They weren't even getting credit for it. It's fun to see their faces.
Awesome.
I usually don't get to see them.
That's really cool. Yeah, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see folks' faces today, but
I know.
we are just as happy that people are here. So we got folks coming in from New Jersey, Connecticut, Wisconsin. All right, we're getting some Midwest folks for you.
Good. I knew they'd represent.
Awesome, Texas. Just remember, folks, in the chat, you can choose to send a message to either us, your panelists, or to all panelists and attendees. So don't be shy to represent your school, represent your city. Solana Beach. There we go. We got some West Coasters. We'll get started in just under 2 minutes, everyone.
Oh, we even have some Michiganders.
I know.
Archdiocese of Detroit representing.
Arch of Detroit. What's going on? Arch of Los Angeles, my old stomping grounds. Pat's coming to us from St. Anthony's in Oxnard. Very cool. Lufkin, Texas, Parkland, Florida. Pat, I am not. I am actually in Charleston, South Carolina right now. Beautiful and humid. I'm still not used to the humidity. It's still a little brutal. All right. Folly Beach, yes. Folly Beach is normally great. Not during a pandemic. Not a big fan of the beach during the pandemic, but yes, Folly Beach is fantastic. We have some great beaches here in South Carolina.
I didn't tell you this, John, but we had an Airbnb scheduled for this month for South Carolina. Did
you really
been, and we had to cancel it. We canceled it back in March.
No,
so
South Carolina.
To stay local. We actually bought a camper instead. I've never went camping, but now we're camping all over Michigan. So
that's awesome. Mm-hmm. That is so awesome. All right. Well, we're right at 1 o'clock. So again, for the folks that have joined us this afternoon, thank you. My name is John Reyes. I'm the Executive Director of Operational Vitality for NCEA. And first and foremost, we want to thank you for the work that you do in Catholic schools and serving and helping serve the 1.5 million Catholic school students that are enrolled in our 6,000 Catholic schools across the nation. So we are grateful for the work you do. Our webinar this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're joining us from, is called Better Together, Collaborating to Support Student Learning. And I'm joined by Jill Annable, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, Instruction, and Technology Integration for the 31 schools in the Diocese of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Did I get that right?
You did. It's a big title.
Awesome.
Trying to live up to it. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a very important reason why we have her here, and she's got so much wisdom and experience to share. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a moment to open in a quick prayer, and acknowledge the presence of God, that wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, whether in person or virtually, that he is in our midst. As we sign ourselves in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we come before you with grateful hearts, knowing and understanding and being so appreciative of the gift that you have given us to be able to serve in this vineyard. And so we ask that as we gather to learn, to share, to collaborate, to pose questions, and to hopefully chart a path forward for the students and families we serve, that your Holy Spirit might be present, that it might enable us to do the work that you have promised, and that you will bring to fulfillment in our saying yes to you. We lift up all of our intentions, all of the desires of our hearts, those of the students and families we serve, and the great commission to which we are each called to. And we make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, before we go any further, Jill, could you introduce yourself and just give a little context for the work you do and your expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am beginning year 5 in this role in our diocesan office. I work with Dave Faber, our superintendent. And prior to that, I have 10 years of teaching experience, middle school and high school, public school, Catholic school. I was raised in our diocese, and I love our schools. My children are now enrolled in one of our schools, early elementary. And I default to collaboration. So I've learned this about myself over time, is that I, by nature, want to work together with others. And I think that's what's led me to this role. I never saw leadership. I thought I would retire in a classroom, but God led me here. So it's been a joy to meet people across the country in Catholic schools. And like many of you, I long for the day we can see each other in person again, because it's always a joy to be at conferences and collaborations together, especially in the Midwest. We're good at pulling our superintendents together in the Midwest. So it'll someday soon.
That's so awesome. Fantastic. Well, I would also want to make sure that all of you that are attending this webinar, if you could briefly introduce yourself in the chat box, if you could just share your school, your location, and your role, that would be awesome. We'd love to know where you're at, what school you're from, and the work you do. We're going to really focus on this idea. And I love what Jill just said there, that she defaults to collaboration. I want to put that on like a t-shirt. Right? It's just like, I default to collaboration. So in the spirit of collaboration, we'd love to know if you could share just your school location and the work you do. What's your role? Are you a teacher? Are you a principal? So go ahead and drop that in the chat box for all to see. Right on. Principals, teachers, DREs, counselors. Lots of grade levels being represented here. Very cool.
So many teachers. I'm so glad. I feel like maybe people are starting to be rested and they're ready to get up and learn again.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, we called a meeting today just to see if people are curious, and they were coming in droves. And I think that's just the nature of this summer, is people are constantly learning and staying connected, which is really...
That's awesome. And what a powerful way to model that for kids and families, this idea of continuous learning, of not just engaging in learning for a grade or for a mark or for accountability, but for just that personal betterment. That's amazing. Great. Please continue to introduce yourself again. Sort of principal, whether you're principal, teacher, what's your role? What school are you at? What city are you coming from? Great shout out to my Archdiocese of LA folks that are in here. I was born and raised and served most of my career in Catholic education in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So, all right, good stuff. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about where we're going for this. And we want this to be a little more conversational. And so know that there's a chat box, there's a Q&A. And so if you have comments or questions, and we'll drop links occasionally to certain things sort of as is appropriate. But we really want to center around this idea of identifying actionable strategies for supporting the needs of adult and student learners, including collaboration, sharing of practices, and capacity building. One of the things that I firmly believe, having served as a teacher, director of technology, assistant superintendent, is this idea that the best way to improve student learning is by improving adult learning. You want to change the trajectory of kids and families, you create meaningful opportunities for learning and collaboration and sharing for teachers and for educators. And so when we learn together, when we know better, we do better. So all of these pieces are so important. And so we want to make sure you're able to walk away with some very actionable strategies on how to elevate adult learning through these three lenses of collaboration, sharing of practices, and capacity building. And we're so glad to have Jill here because, you know, I've had the pleasure of working with Jill the last couple of months, and Jill has put on an absolute masterclass in facilitating system-wide adult learning. And so that's why we're so glad to have her here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have it be sort of conversational. Feel free to pose questions. But I want to start first with this idea of a culture of collaboration. And so, Jill, I'd love to know, you know, you talked a little bit about these classroom learning labs. So looking back at the last 4 months of this massive shift, you know, so walk us through how you use classroom learning labs to create this culture of collaboration.
Sure. So we'll have to shift back a little further. Prior to March, we've in previous years, and actually it was supposed to happen this year, the day before the shutdown of schools, we were in our diocesan PD day, which we in the last few years have changed those over to classroom learning labs. So if you're familiar with Marzano's instructional rounds, or even if you think about it in a hospital, you do instructional rounds as you teach surgeons. Teachers should be doing the same thing, right? So I'm a big fan of the open door, come help me be a better teacher, collaboration model. And we've learned that through a protocol that we're calling classroom learning labs. And these classroom learning labs follow with a facilitated teacher, a facilitator and a host teacher, and we watch each other teach and give each other advice, but also we mostly reflect on our own practices as we watch another. I learned when I came into this role that we have all the answers probably among the 450 teachers in our diocese. We don't necessarily have to spend the big bucks to bring in the big name. We've read all the books. We've been to all the PD. The good practices are happening in our classrooms. And all the teachers in this call and principals know that too. You have strong teachers and strong practices among you. You just don't get to watch each other. So looking back, classroom learning labs really built a culture of collaboration because it broke down that vulnerable practice of watching each other. And we've done this diocese-wide. I think we've hosted something like 180 classroom learning labs over the last 3 years. All grade levels, all subjects, integrated teachers. So it's like groups of 10 teachers or so watching each other, and then it's all about thinking aloud before it and after it. So you're hearing a master teacher think aloud about the lesson we're about to watch. You watch them teach, and then you listen to them debrief on how it went. And just hearing each other speak about their classrooms has built this practice. I have all the materials. We have a PDF and also an editable copy of our packet that we use during a classroom learning lab. I'm happy to share that out. It's very Catholic. We've created it to be our own from other sources, and I'm happy to share that out with anyone who emails me. I'll just send it back to you. So we've actually done a previous NCA webinar on this topic. It probably has Classroom Learning Lab in the title with some of our facilitator teachers, and all those resources are in that webinar as well.
So talk a little bit about how you adapted it sort of post-pandemic. So you were able to retain this practice even with sort of the disruption in teaching and learning.
Yes, so we were not live watching people teach then since March, but we are thinking ahead in this year that we have all of these recorded lessons now. Teachers had to record everything that they were delivering from March until now, and all of those recorded lessons can be still that practice. So thinking about professional learning communities and all the small ways and big ways that we collaborate, now we have all this recorded instructional time that we can look at together. It's like how a football team watches film. This is what we should be doing. If we're willing to be vulnerable, we have all the content now. If you have the right protocol around the conversation, it can be very safe. It's like when you ask students in language arts class to do some peer response. This is what we're doing, but in a safe, protocoled way, we can do this really well with teachers and with each other.
That's awesome. I'm going to drop the link to the Marzano article. We'll shout it out a little bit later. I'm going to put this in the chat box for everybody. So can you talk a little bit about how you took sort of this idea of instructional rounds at Mars, and you mentioned adapting it to a Catholic context. Like, how did you sort of make it fit within the charism and the culture of a Catholic school?
Well, we wanted to make sure that we begin and end everything in prayer. We wanted to make sure that we talked about it in a way that also applies to strong instruction and theology. When you come to a classroom learning lab, you're bringing to the table your intention. So instead of sit and get professional development, you're coming there, and one page of this protocol is all about I'm working on blank as a teacher. And so when I watch the teacher, I'm going to look for blank. You're filling in the blank. And sometimes I'm working on Catholic identity as a teacher. I'm looking at integrating the Catholic faith in my classroom. So this is how we can have a first grade teacher watching a 10th grade teacher, because good practices in Catholic schools stretch every classroom. So really, we built the model, and you'll see it in our protocol as we share it if people want it, that this is not a secular idea.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just summarize those key 3 pieces there, right? This idea of beginning and ending with prayer, connections to strong instruction in theology, and then setting a personal intention as an observer. I think those are really powerful things. And I love that you mentioned this idea of, a strong protocol and something that's invitational rather than confrontational. Mm-hmm. Allows a first grade teacher to observe a 10th grade teacher and vice versa. And we always struggle often with I'm the only second grade teacher in my building. Well, what am I going to do? And I like this idea of a clean protocol allowing for learning no matter what the grade level is.
Yes.
So I want to sort of get to the brass tacks question, which I think is going to be important for our folks that are here with us on the webinars. How to do this within my school? Like, do I go right from 0 to 60 with these classroom learning labs, these instructional rounds? What are 1 to 2 things I can do in my school tomorrow or next week or next month to move towards this culture of collaboration?
Yeah, it makes me think about how we model that as leaders. So for the principals or superintendents in the call, we also have had all of our meetings recorded probably, or at least some chunks of them. So how might you, as a school leader, show a segment of a meeting that went wrong in March and April? We know they did. We know there were vulnerable moments. How would you rewatch that film with your teachers to teach them how you would put language around it? What do you notice from this meeting? What do you wonder about because of how people contributed to this meeting? If we start teaching this type of language, we can get a little further. Or even finding a teacher in your building who's willing to show a few minutes of a virtual classroom. We're all going to have to teach to some capacity online, whether it's one-on-one coaching a student who's home, or it's the whole class is home. We have to think about, how do we watch a few minutes of that footage and then say, what do you notice? What do you wonder? It's not, I should have, or you should have, or why didn't you? It's, what do you notice, and what does that make you question? And I think that's a safe place for people to share. And I think us modeling that for our colleagues really helps us break down those walls, because none of this stuff is easy. Regular teaching isn't easy. That's why we love, once you shut your door and you teach with kids, it's a lot easier than letting adults in to watch you, especially because we value our colleagues. And I think modeling that vulnerability is really important.
That's awesome. So that's a great take on that box. School leaders, if you're in a position of leadership in your school, is this idea, if you want to move to a culture of collaboration or deepen that culture of collaboration, it's that modeling with vulnerability. Any specific takeaway or an action step sort of that a classroom teacher can do to move towards this culture of collaboration?
I think about my 10 years of teaching and how much we don't get a lot of praise as teachers. You're just kind of in it. You're in the thick of it. You don't know. But the best compliment you could give to the teacher down the hall is, I know you're doing good stuff, and I'm wondering if I can watch you. And whether that means joining their virtual class, like, can I just join your virtual class and I won't say a word? I just really want to see how you're doing this. That's a really good compliment. And your colleagues aren't going to tell you no. They're going to tell you that they're nervous. But, we all love each other, or else we wouldn't be in these Catholic schools. So I think reaching out to your teacher colleague that you trust and you admire is going to be a really good step to building these networks of collaboration.
And that's so awesome, because it's very much in a school, we want to build a culture of collaboration from the top down with expert modeling of, from the leader, but also from the bottom up is to say, how do we create collaboration very organically? So it sounds like your recommendation for teachers is to lean into your colleagues' classrooms and lean into their expertise.
I think so. And it doesn't have to be the master teacher. We're learning that too. If the protocol aims toward the positive, you can find positive in every lesson. Even the lesson that flops, if it's a bad day, a bad hour, even a lesson that flops has strengths. And if when we talk about the strengths, the negative moments just dissipate. Like we don't repeat them. We just get rid of old practices when they're not effective. And if we honor and talk about the positive, they will multiply.
That's really awesome. And you mentioned this protocol piece so many times, and it seems that the protocols are a really great way to sort of keep the conversations focused and productive.
I think so. I'm going to try as we're talking, I'm going to download it as a PDF and see if I can put it in the chat box. I don't know if that's going to work, but I'll try.
That'll be awesome. Fantastic. All right. So while we're doing that, let's go ahead and shift to this whole idea of sharing practices. And one thing was awesome, and I remember tweeting an image of this, this must have been probably a month or so ago, and it was like the tail end of the year. And it was just impressive seeing how many educators in the Diocese of Grand Rapids were still engaged, like up until the very last moment of like a 3.5 month intense sprint. And you were able to create sort of structures within and across schools for grade level meetings. Now, grade level meetings aren't a new structure in Catholic schools. Talk a little bit about how sort of you were able to repurpose this in the new reality.
Yeah, it was a little insane. So we all shifted overnight, like everyone did. And we were supporting principals right on day one with the kind of open-ended meeting. What do you need? It was very much triage. And as we entered week 2, a colleague and I, Erin Weaver, who's our ed tech specialist, she was supporting everyone we have an integrated student information system, Infinite Campus, and just right now in live time, we are launching diocese-wide Canvas as our diocesan LMS. And as Erin and I were working together in week 2, just again, answering hundreds of teacher emails, we thought, what if we just call a meeting? Like, we'll just call a meeting and we're gonna name it 3rd through 5th grade teachers check-in. And our only agenda item was, how's it going? And we thought if one person shows up, that's fine. And if more, that's great. And they came. From that moment on, we had 40 to 80 people in these weekly chats. And of course, they didn't stay with how's it going. That was our premise that we started with. But we built this structure for 10 weeks. I guess 11 weeks or so, where through spring break, people are showing up on spring break week. And we just said, how's it going? And then by the second week, we realized we couldn't lead it all because there were so many different groups. We had a preschool group, we had student supports, so all of our special ed and interventionists. Then we had K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, high school, principals, and our ed tech network. So we had all these different weekly meetings going on, and we realized we couldn't build all the content for all these. So out of necessity, we had to, we would reach out to someone and say, to a teacher and say, can you lead the prayer today? Can you lead an icebreaker today? Can you share a practice today? And of course, we were tapping into people that we knew were doing some solid things, but also some open-ended, we needed all hands on deck. And they became great hours, very conversational. This is obviously, we're presenting to you, but some staff meetings are more top down than others. And what we realized in these, if we were quiet enough, if we used virtual wait time, people would just start chatting and sharing their screen and then sharing their screen and having these really robust conversations. And we just had to build the structure and get out of the way. And that was beautiful. So we thought, okay, they might need this for a few weeks. We'll just keep inviting them a week at a time, a week at a time, a week at a time. And then they just never stopped. So people were asking for them over the summer, and we're like, we all need a break from each other. But the final one, we invited all the teachers from all the groups and just kind of did a bring your favorite teacher mug, and we kind of did a cheers, and it was great. And a lot of teachers said that it was also good modeling. We tried to model little pieces of how to run a virtual meeting because they were all doing it in live time with their students. And I think that was also really helpful.
So as we go into the fall, and no matter what modality we're going to be in, this idea of having effective meetings across teachers is going to be so important. So going into the fall, what are some tips on how teachers and school leaders can work to really maximize the time that they have together?
It's going to be really hard to find that time. I know that's first and foremost. We've struggled with We will likely have some schools in and some schools out based on what local health departments are saying they can do, right? We're gonna have to be shutting down local schools if there's cases and things like that. And so trying to build in, what time of day do you even call that faculty meeting? And when you're not talking about all the urgent procedure things, when do you get to talk about the art of teaching is really hard. So that's why I built out a schedule last week and shared it out with all of our principals in our diocese for the whole first semester. And it's not weekly, so we're gonna maintain all 8 of those groups. The principals will meet weekly, but all the other groups of teachers, they're gonna meet every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or so. I think it's 10 times through the first semester, as an open-ended invitation to come collaborate. And we've set it for an after-school time, and I put it in for we call them sketches, so in the state of Michigan, so it can count for continuing education credits. And it's an open invitation for collaboration. Now, I don't know what that means at the building level. I know, and I would love to hear your ideas in the chat box on this. How are you going to build time for PLCs? How are you going to build time for teachers to look at their practices? My biggest fear, and this is kind of off script, but I think important, is that, you know, actually in one of our weekly meetings by May, we talked about how long does it take to break a habit? And we know our teachers grew so much from March through June because they had to. There was new things they had to try, and then they realized they were really solid teacher moves to make. My worry is that as we go into the fall, will some people fall back into last fall's lesson plans, even if they weren't the strongest, forgetting the things that they learned in March, April, May. And so I wonder how we're going to build in some PLCs that help to recognize the strengths that we're having, and make sure our teachers don't burn out, because that's a pretty big worry too. So building the time is going to be the hardest thing. Right. But I think that's where our diocesan colleagues are really, and some of you do this by region too in your diocese. You may have some neighboring Catholic schools. Now is the time to collaborate. They're no longer the person, you know, we have to let down our wall of they may steal our students, or what if they're better than us. I mean, I think there's a lot of fear about enrollment and things, but we're all in this. And I think you're going to need your neighboring school colleagues to keep you through this. The solidarity is really important right now, so we don't burn out. So, so I think cross building is really possible now that we're virtual. And in a lot of ways, we've figured out how to do a virtual meeting, so you can really invite far and wide.
That's awesome. And I'm curious, I'd love to know in the chat box if you could share just at your schools, what's faculty collaboration time going to look like? So do you guys have standing faculty meetings? Do you have sort of set agendas? Are you able to sort of switch up your groupings between sort of whole faculty and grade levels? We're curious to see what that piece is like. And in particular, Jill, I want to pick up on something you said about sort of the burnout piece. And it seems like what you're proposing here is this isn't just, although it's primarily about supporting student learning, it's also making sure that we are attentive, aware to sort of the social emotional needs and the mental health needs of teachers, right? Can you talk a little bit about the shift in how the grade level meetings help sort of, like, I guess, be attentive to teachers' mental health needs?
I think, and honestly, I mean, we know the difference of going into a meeting where the leader of the meeting just starts talking. There's so much urgent information that needs to get out. And I think all of us are guilty of those moments in these meetings. But what we learned from that first meeting was that we have to start with, how are you? How are you? Can you tell us in the chat box, how are you? How's it going? We're not going to move on until we hear from 5 people. And then say, we're going to add all of our prayer intentions into the chat box, and we're going to, you know, silence our hearts for a minute or two until we're ready. And then let's pray. I think modeling that helped to model that process for classrooms who are meeting virtually, which taught families how to pray. I mean, I think we're in all these moments where we're influencing families in such a way by teaching at home as well. I got on a tangent and forgot the question, but I think building the how are you was as simple as it needed to be, because people in this vulnerable space, everyone was sharing how they truly were, and then we knew how to follow up. And if you forget that, when you're virtual, you can read it on someone's face, or they come into the meeting and I mean, you can kind of see it if you're live with someone, but if you're virtual, we needed to actually ask the question.
Right. And I'm a big believer in this idea that educators bring their whole selves to the work that they do, right? And I feel like it's a common adage to tell people to sort of check their emotions and their life situations at the door, and when they're at work, be at work. And that's just not, that wasn't the case before, right? Like we brought our whole selves to work, and honestly, as educators, as mission-driven educators, we do best when we bring our whole selves to work. Well, whether we're in person or we're teaching from the comfort of our living room, we don't have that option to sort of say we're going to check ourselves and our family and our life circumstance at the door. So inviting people to bring that and acknowledging that, I think it does way more benefit than I think whatever the harm might be.
Yeah, John, that's the difference between Catholic schools and my 9 years in public schools. Hands down. Like my kids were crawling on me in these meetings, and I'm telling teachers, we got this, and my own kids are like shirtless and running around, and it was humbling, but it was also like, we are the church. Like we are the church, and it is our mission to carry through Catholic schools to support families. And I worry that our teachers are really overwhelmed. I'm hoping by now that they're rested. But I hope that they are also coming to their faculty meetings, and this is kind of a message to all of you of what do you need? What do you need in order to be successful this school year is going to be such an important question that you feel that your school leadership is asking you. And it's not, we all need more time. We all need more planning. We all need less responsibilities. And we all know in Catholic schools that that won't be the answer, but it will be, what do you need? How might we do virtual retreats? How might we check in with each other? How might something like a PLC grow us professionally, but also help us spiritually? We've also really prioritized theology of the body in our diocese. We also, I'm in the process of building out year 2 of our weekly theology of the body check-ins, which are a little bit of learning and a lot of discussion about St. John Paul II's teachings. And I think that is going to help us root ourselves in taking care of our families.
So it seems that the key takeaway here is don't be ashamed and actually encourage your colleagues as well as yourself to bring the fullness of who you are, not just as an educator, but as a child of God, as somebody who's living and dealing with this just as much as the families and students we're serving. That enables that rich sharing of practices.
I think so. And I think we have to listen to each other. So yeah, I'm hoping to learn from those in the call too. What do you all need? Because as a collective group of leaders, that's going to help us.
So let's talk capacity building. And so you had alluded to this a little bit. This is sort of the last sort of pillar we'll touch on here as part of our time together today, is this idea of teacher leadership. So teacher leadership sort of happened organically, but there was some intentionality behind it, I'm pretty sure.
I think so. And it's funny because looking back, as someone in a group of people and the Holy Spirit saw leadership in me that I didn't see in myself. So I was hired in our Catholic schools thinking I would retire there, just glad to be back home in the high school I grew up in. But by design, everyone was nudging me into this role. And I feel like in my 4 years so far in this role, going into year 5, I'm learning who those future leaders are just by watching them teach and watching the questions that they ask. And so not because you're looking for your replacement anywhere. I think a lot of times we think of, I need to figure out which teacher could take my spot if I were to ever leave. But I think more so because we know teacher leadership is really powerful. We need to start seeing that in each other. And that means the colleague down the hall and the potential principal or whatever. But I think we need to build up each other's strengths and recognize in people what they can do. So for me, this happened as we were trying to build classroom learning labs. People had to lead those classroom learning labs. So people who know cognitive coaching skills, people who have maybe taken some leadership role or are willing to be a leader to their colleagues needed to run these classrooms. So I needed 50 people who are willing or able to run classroom learning labs. And what's funny is last year we had 7 vacant spots for principals, and they were all, not all, but it was like they were soaked up by these classroom learning lab facilitators who then said, like, yeah, I'm ready to lead now. And I think there's other dioceses who have done very, very well with building up teacher leadership programs. We haven't done that very officially here, but I think we're watching our teacher leaders, people who are willing to take little spots in these grade level meetings, are also the ones who are saying, I might get my next master's degree in leadership. Or I don't know. I think we need to build up teacher leaders, not because they're going to become the principals, but because they're going to start building these PLCs and these little networks that are strong. And so organically this happens in each of your buildings. You've all seen this happen, but I think building up each other's strengths helps us to work to our fullest potential.
Yeah, and it's something that Michael Fullan talks about in the book Cultures Built to Last, and he talks about how these rich professional learning cultures at schools require lots of leaders. And this idea that leadership is not just a quality of the role of a person, but the quality of the organization. So when we look at our schools, especially as we go into the fall, how do we develop collective leadership, distributed leadership? You know, John Hattie talks about this concept of collective teacher efficacy. I'm going to paste this link here.
Yes.
Right. So talk a little bit about this and how this maybe guided this idea of teacher leadership.
Yeah, so if you haven't looked into John Hattie's work, so that visible learning, so what's the best bang for our buck? So which strategies are the most effective for student learning? So all back to student learning, what can do the most good? And at the top of that scale is teacher efficacy. So how effective a teacher feels has the biggest impact. It has a bigger impact than class size, differentiated instruction, you name it. Everything else is below teacher efficacy. And so when we are at our worst and we're not feeling effective and we're still delivering instruction, it is having such an impact on students. And we know it's probably because of relationships and because of confidence and all of that, but collective teacher efficacy then is above that. So as an organization, so as a diocese or as a school or even as a pod of teachers, how effective we feel impacts everything. And so every professional development opportunity, oh, thank you for finding that, amazing. So every professional development opportunity we have should be centered on that. When I walk out of this professional development, and hopefully it's a series of embedded ongoing professional development, are my teachers, are my colleagues, am I feeling more effective or do I just feel more overwhelmed? And so, anyhow, so that's the root. I continuously think about that as I make decisions as a leader. And I think these weekly meetings and our work ahead is going to be about supporting each other, because collectively we can do a lot more good than working in isolation and in silos. And we know that's true of our smallest schools. If I'm the only first grade teacher I know, how am I going to get better? Because there are specific things that happen in first grade that I need some colleagues for. And I think in a diocese, we can work together to support each other. So this is part of it. There's a million things that show the effect size. Collective teacher efficacy is at the top.
Yeah, so this is fantastic work. If you have not heard about it, you definitely want to check it out. You may not want to read the whole book because the whole book's fairly dense, but John Hattie put together a fantastic sort of a collection of meta research or of meta analyses on student achievement. And so what John Hattie acknowledges here, and this is something that I'm super passionate about, is this idea that we're not saying that everything has some sort of effect on student learning, right? And he tracks things from, like, you could see your socioeconomic status, right? We know that has an impact. You know, like NWA has done research, for example, that shows that they can explain about half of the variability in student achievement based on socioeconomic status. So it's not saying that it doesn't have an impact, it does. And things like home environment and parental involvement, and wow, what a time to be talking about home environment and parental involvement. All these things have an impact, and we would be remiss not to acknowledge that. And Hattie goes and says things like summer programs and even preterm birth weight have some sort of measurable impact on student learning. But our challenge as educators is, as Jill said, what gives us the most bang for our buck? What's going to give us the most impact given the limited amount of time and resources we have? And what John Hattie's research says overwhelmingly is invest in teacher learning, invest in building teacher efficacy, because those other pieces will still have an impact. But if we want to match or even overcome that, we do that by investing in the efficacy and the capacity of teachers. So going back to this teacher leadership piece, whether you have a formalized program or not, Jill, how do we start building this capacity of this culture of distributed leadership in our schools?
It goes back to something I said earlier, and that is going to the teacher down the hall and saying, I know you're doing something right and I want to watch you. And I think that is really small, but it has really great impact, because we in the hustle and bustle of getting through the day and the week and the month of a Catholic school teacher, it's it's hard to find those moments where we can build up our colleagues. And I think that is going to have the greatest impact, because then once you watch them teach, you can go down the hall and say, have you seen them teach? You should come with me next time. We're going to go next week again and watch them teach again. And that doesn't take away from the leadership of the principal. That doesn't take away from any of the formalized leaders, but I think that we need to build each other up, and then we might see in ourselves leadership capacity that we haven't tapped into before.
That's awesome. That's so great. We mentioned a couple of these resources here. We talked about the instructional rounds piece. We pasted a link to the power of collective efficacy. Could you talk a little bit about how the Call to Community book sort of helped build a framework for the work you've done in Grand Rapids?
Yeah, I think so. And I love my friends over at Loyola. I think that sometimes you see terms like PLCs and you think, oh, that's such a public school thing. And this book really debunks that feeling. And the NASVEX do too. We're in two, actually, because we use the NASVEX for accreditation, there are two areas that if you do not have PLCs, you really can't score well at all in the NASVEX. But this book is a quick read. It's a great read to do with some colleagues if you're trying to build a professional learning community in your school, because it comes from a Catholic framework, and it says this is true to who we are. We are called to community. We can't do this in isolation. And I think that that's a great framework to read as you build PLCs in your school. And that's everything we're talking about, is building each other up and working smarter because we're working together.
That piece is so important, and it makes me think of just sort of an anecdote that a colleague who's now the superintendent in the Diocese of San Jose, Jennifer Beltramo, shared, and so she would talk about how religious orders and the sisters that helped found and sustain and grow so many of our vibrant Catholic school communities, they were the original PLCs because they had that laser-like focus on student learning. They created communities of practice and sharing and collaboration around what it is that helps students learn and grow, not only in wisdom, but in virtue. They just happen to live with their PLC colleagues. Now, we're not saying go live with your colleagues in a PLC, but if we're trying to talk about the roots of this rich culture of collaboration and this laser-like focus on student learning, we don't have to look much further than the legacy of Catholic schools in the United States and how these orders that were animated by this charism, they built structures and organizations and routines and practices around that focus on serving students.
That's incredible. Is that in writing somewhere? What's that source?
You know what? It's probably a good opportunity to write a book on it, right? Like it's, or to learn from what you all are doing at your schools, because there's so much of what we do that is we stand on the shoulders of these amazing women that created these fantastic learning cultures. And our challenge really is just how do we translate that to the current day rather than how do we toss the baby out with the bathwater. So. Yeah,
totally. And we all kind of live together at this point because everyone's seen my living room. I'm in my office today, but I feel like so many hundreds of people have seen my life. They know the sound of my dishwasher. Like everyone has been in each other's space. So we're almost there.
Awesome. Good stuff. As another resource here, and as Jill and I were sort of talking about the pieces that we wanted to make sure we shared with you all, I would definitely recommend too, if you're looking to sort of have practical, actionable strategies on creating these vibrant learning cultures, The Art of Coaching Teams by Elena Aguilar is a fantastic book. It is absolutely top notch in terms of saying, how do we cultivate adult learning and work around a shared vision? How do we define process, product, and protocol? How do we address issues of emotional resistance? What does feedback look like? How do we get people to sort of row together rather than sort of rowing in different directions? And if you're a fan of protocols, there's a ton of protocols in there to create structures and ways for equitable participation, for voice, ways to help increase trust, which I know is huge. And I think we can say a lot about how, the last 4 months have been a way for us to sort of break out and try new things. But I think we would be foolish to not understand that we may have schools where interpersonally trust might be still an issue. And so it's important to recognize that, to affirm that, to actively sort of build trust when that isn't there, because that precedes a lot of the richer collaboration. Quick plug here. One of the things that we know as NCA is that we can talk about all these great things and give concrete examples and make sure we're able to sort of share the expertise and wisdom of Catholic school leaders across the nation. We also know that we have a responsibility as an organization to walk with you and journey with you in that. And so for this coming year, we're expanding our catalog of professional services offerings, and we're looking to offer micro-credentialing programs in a number of key areas, including STREAM, hybrid distance learning, and the national standards and benchmarks, as well as specific leadership training for early career leaders, whether you're a president, principal, head of school, elementary, secondary, whether you're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or Oxnard, California. We feel that these programs can help build your capacity, connect you with a nationwide network of Catholic educators and thought partners, and be looped into best practice and next practice for Catholic schools. So these are really exciting opportunities. We're looking to roll these out within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So please check out that website, check out our full list of program offerings, and make sure to complete an interest form there. And maybe you might see either Jill or myself in one of those courses. You may never know. So we're going to wrap things up too. If you'd like a little bit more reading on this idea of how do we foster sort of cultures of collaboration, Tina Moore, who's a vice principal at a school here in Charleston, South Carolina, wrote this fantastic post on how the parable of the sower is illuminative in terms of creating a culture of collaboration in the school. Definitely worth checking it out. It's on the NCA blog. But as we come to the end of our time, this is our contact information, but we'd love to invite you to ask any questions. There's a Q&A box that you can use there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pose it around what we talked about in terms of collaboration, in terms of capacity building, in terms of sharing practices, our favorite restaurants. So we'll stick around. If you, once you exit out, you'll be asked to complete a post-webinar survey. If you can complete that, that'd be great. But Jill and I will stick around for a little bit. And I know that Jill has a ton of resources that we'll be able to send out to participants at the end of this. So we're here. If you need to jump off, totally great. If you have any questions, please use the chat box or the Q&A.
Yeah, so we have all kinds of stuff in this packet. Leanna's asking about a rubric for teachers to fill out as they watch each other. So our protocol for classroom learning labs really isn't giving feedback to the teacher. So you are not judging how that teacher is doing. You're really reflecting on yourself, which feels super safe for that teacher. They're going to learn about themselves because they're going to listen to other people's reflections, but they're not going to get a feedback on a rubric. I have that whole packet for you. So if you email me, I will reply to you with that packet. I should have thought to put it in here and I didn't. And I was trying to do it on the fly and I'm going to mess it up. So I'll get that to you so you can see it's all the worksheets. It's everything they would need for that day if they wanted to try one.
That's really cool. I love the idea that like the learning walk is meant for the observer to self-reflect rather than, yeah, good stuff. So again, any questions, thoughts for those that are leaving comments in the chat box? Thank you.
I know we could really use a tough question or two, I think. Oh, I know. Our elected teachers are also going to be traveling from room to room. And I know there's an extra burden. Actually, I was telling our science teacher, our middle school science teacher, that to actually think back to last spring. So our science teachers were kind of pulling the Apollo 13 move where they were telling all of their students, like, do you have a string? Are there any paper cups? Like, what do you have available to you to do this investigation? and I said, just remind yourself where you were at in the spring. Now as the science teacher, can't really use the lab because they're instead going to move from middle school classroom to middle school classroom. I said, think about what are those key things you have to bring with you? What are those key, anything is better than the Apollo 13. We're not trying to teach them at home, hopefully, for as many days as possible. So instead, what can you bring room to room that's going to have the biggest impact? And what we're saying to our PE teachers is that this is our opportunity to teach health. This is our opportunity to get outside, but also to bring our classrooms outside, but also in those classroom times to be able to focus on music theory, focus on some things that if you feel like blowing into instruments is too much to start, like let's start with some things that we normally don't get to do. And I think this is your permission to get really creative. And if it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. And it's okay. We're just so glad to be back to music class. My own children need so many skills that I can't teach them because I'm not their art teacher and music teacher. And I could only facilitate so much from my home. So think about all the things that are the biggest impact. Music appreciation, music theory. There are things you can do that you can start that feels less overwhelming than how am I going to get all these kids singing, or how am I going to get them all doing this in masks. I think there's a lot to think about there, but start small. Know that you're being appreciated. Our families just want the full offerings. So the little things make a big impact.
The question from Chris is really fascinating. If you could only pick one strategy to employ in a small school with a small faculty, what would you recommend?
Ooh, that's okay, good question. John, how would you answer it?
I think it would really depend. And my thing is about sort of the emotional safety level. I would want to have a sense of like, what's the level of emotional safety? But I feel like if you're trying to either repair or build trust or collegiality when that isn't necessarily there yet, I would say having very focused collaboration on something where they could have a quick win on, I think is so huge. So think about sort of a small project or a small initiative where people can you can reset the norms of collaboration and get them to achieve sort of this one thing in a very small time frame, celebrate a short-term win, sort of affirm the change in behavior, then I think that'll pay dividends because you've now sort of created the template for what you want collaboration to look like. So I would not recommend saying like, okay, like let's reset our norms of collaboration, for example, around our reopening plan, because that's big and it's nebulous and there's so many sort of massive factors. Mm-hmm. But if we want to just say, let's figure out how we are going to communicate to parents on a weekly basis, sort of a small thing where we can sort of get some coherence and build some strategies out on, get a short-term win there, that helps, I think, move towards a larger culture of collaboration. That's just my piece without understanding anything else about the school context. Yeah. It's a good question, though.
And John, what I heard in your answer too was that that need for teacher efficacy. You're saying a good win, a short-term win helps to build their confidence level as teachers and helps them to collaborate. I think the biggest thing we can do wrong in that moment, Chris, is to not understand where our teachers are right now. And with a small faculty, you probably, hopefully, have a sense of what their needs are. I think are the biggest wrong move we could make is say, we're going to do this book study because it's this book that I've been thinking about, as opposed to how are you and what do you need? Which we're all professionals. So what your teachers will say that they need is probably what they need. And trying to help them design what they need for the year, how much collaboration is too much and what types of meetings do you need to have? Because I think the most frustrating things our teachers are finding right now is that we're pulling them into meetings about school reopening plans, but what they really want to talk about is instruction. So I think we need to really hone in on what they need as teachers.
That's a really interesting distinction, by the way, is difference between instruction and then school reopening.
Yeah, I mean, it all has to happen, but they don't want to do that other stuff, or else they would have became the principal. Like they don't want to do it. They want to talk about how to design the course template.
Yeah. So Lana has a question here about the weekly check-ins.
So I am the diocese, so that helps. I would be the person you would ask. So that helped in my favor. So we start. Okay, so I guess this goes back a little further. So 4 years ago, I realized, like, first week on the job, I said, okay, well, I have this thing I want to email to all the second grade teachers. And the people in my office are like, there's no way to just email the second grade teachers. And I thought, are you kidding me? Like, where's like the Google group with all the second grade teacher email addresses in it? And there wasn't one. So there were layers of collaboration that had to happen from the get-go of how do we get information straight to teachers from our office, and how do they email each other? Because now that's the most active thing in my inbox, is teachers talking to each other. Like, hey, second grade colleagues, how do I, or what are you using for? And da 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 da. So there's all these email chains going on. So we just called it, so we all have a common Google Calendar. So we just plopped it on, we just sent them a Google invitation to a Google Meet and invited all kindergarten, first and second grade teachers. And it all went onto their common calendar and they showed up. So there is some logistics you have to think through. And you could start with your neighboring schools. You could go through principals. What I love my principal colleagues. They aren't great at forwarding emails on to teachers so that teachers can collaborate. So you can start there. It's just not going to go as fast as if you can get straight to them. So we have 450 teachers, 31 schools. And so that was all diocese wide. But you can open those collaborations as wide as you think you can manage. And I would start with your Office of Catholic Schools. They're probably really overwhelmed. I think we're all trying to we're all spread thin. It depends on who you have in that office and their capacity for figuring this out with you. We just built those through Google Groups, and we had to do it through a Google form at first and try to figure out who everyone was and what their contact information is. But we also have them in the same student information system. So we had a leg up on trying to get to everyone. And then now they just keep coming. So you have to realize once you start doing stuff like this, it's not going to go away, we realized. So that's the hard part too.
By the way, just want to affirm that is absolutely true. Most diocesan leaders are like, they would love to have people saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And so I would not hesitate to reach out to diocesan leaders, superintendents, directors, program coordinators, hold us accountable. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and then also all principal colleagues, you could say, I really want to get all the middle school teachers together. You start with wherever your biggest need is and just start with that one meeting and that one thing. Don't try to do it all. If you just want your middle school theology teachers to get together, call that meeting and try to get as specific as you can with who to invite. And then you can always build from there.
Yeah, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right?
Right.
Good stuff. We have about 2 more minutes, so this is sort of just if you want to squeeze in any more questions here, we'll stick around for about the next 2 minutes. But yeah, keep the questions coming. These are great. There was a second part to Lana's question about keeping the check-ins from becoming a gripe fest. How did you do that? That's actually really great.
Well, I think it's because I was there. So I was leading and facilitating from the diocesan office. They're not going to do that with me. Like although they see me as a former teacher colleague, I'm still the assistant superintendent. So as long as I'm inviting with my language and I'm not evaluating them, and I truly am coming with a collaborative spirit, they're still going to come.
Yeah.
But if it's just teachers and you haven't set a protocol, we also have to lead those first meetings with a protocol. And our protocol was icebreaker, prayer, sharing a practice, and then helping each other. It could not, and we also had a number of principals who were constantly in because they were realizing that their teachers were learning things, and then they're bringing them back to the weekly school faculty meeting, and they're like, oh my gosh, I should have been in there. So we had principals sprinkled into all these meetings, and that helped probably keep that griping at bay, but they also, that comes out of trust and collaboration, and building these relationships virtually is a lot harder than already having these relationships. I've been in every single classroom in this diocese. They know I am their friend and colleague. That makes a big impact than like Big Brother coming in and calling a meeting. So I think it has to be, you have to set the tone by modeling.
Awesome. Friend from the diocesan office. What a great turn of phrase. I love it. Okay, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So again, thank you so much for being here. Jill, thank you so much. Any sort of last words of wisdom before we sign off here?
No, thank you, John. I feel like I have like 50 new friends now. So I'm hoping that we can all work on projects together.
Awesome. Well, from all of us at NCEA, thank you so much for attending. We hope to catch you at our next webinar. Be well, everyone.